Today I'm joined by Peter Meyler. He's an editor and an author, and he co-edited the book Pierpoint, A Stolen Life. And the new book that I hadn't heard of, is this a new book or is this...
It came out a couple of years after Stolen Life.
Okay, and it's called Broken Shackles. And this is especially exciting for me. I sit on the Heritage Central Wellington Committee. Oh, yeah. And shortly after moving to the Fergus area, I was delighted to find out that there was an almost hidden community located just 500 yards from where I'd moved that really wasn't the forefront of any of the local history. And so when the book came out, I was very interested to find out about the life of Richard Pierpoint. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
And how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was born in Fergus and raised here. And my parents had built a house just outside of Fergus on St. Andrew Street.
Oh, yeah.
And we went to school at John Black Public School. And it was until 1983 when Fergus was 150 years old. Pat Mestern had written a 2-volume history of Fergus, and one page or page and a quarter was something called the Pierpoint Settlement, which again no one had ever heard of. And so that intrigued me, and I figured eventually someone would put up a marker or some sort of historical memorial for Pierpoint, and that didn't happen. So in '94, I started just a small project to put up a plaque for him under the local marking program from the Heritage Foundation. Yeah. And so that went in front of John Black Public School, where I went to school.
Yeah, and if you want to see it, it's tucked back right in front of the actual school building itself.
That's right.
And I guess you have to park and you have to walk up to the front of the school, and it's still on the huge stone there. Yeah. But it is a good marker, and it's fitting that it's in that location.
Yeah, it was just by coincidence that that's right in the middle of Pierpoint's land.
Yeah.
See, because when we started doing the research for the Heritage Foundation, because in order to get the grant money, you have to have research on the individual. We didn't know where his property was. We knew it was around Fergus somewhere, but it could have been on the west, north, south. We didn't know. And so when we finally realized that it was right across the street from our house, and the school was right in the middle of it. So, yeah, it was a nice coincidence.
So. During the research, you have a co-author of this?
Yeah,
this
my
book?
brother David. He, because my background is graphic design, so I didn't really write anything before.
Yeah.
He took history at U of T, and he's very good at military history. So he was excellent.
And it's excellent in this point because
exactly.
Richard Pierpoint was known as
Captain Dick.
Yeah.
And he was a member of Butler's Rangers during the American Revolution, which was a guerrilla warfare group, basically. And you had to know how to live in the woods and be pretty tough to be part of the Rangers. And so he knew how to live in the wild and get along with people and do that kind of thing. And then, of course, in the War of 1812, he was with the Colored Corps, which was an all-black militia unit that he had actually petition to have formed.
And how old was he when the War of 1812 started?
He would have been about 68 years old.
And he was putting together a militia.
Yeah. And that's why, and you can see he had some sort of standing in the community that they would call him captain. Because he never had the rank of captain. He was just a private in both Butler's Rangers and in the War of 1812. So.
And the land that former East Garifax and now part of Fergus. How did he acquire that land?
Well, he had written a petition in about 1820. And what happened was, after the war, soldiers were supposed to get 6 months' pay. Well, the government didn't have money. What a surprise. It's the same story today, right? So they didn't give them money, they gave them land. Now, Pierpoint by that time is well in his 70s. Doesn't need 100 acres in the middle of nowhere, which is where West Garifax, the township, was in, because there was not even a road up here. You had to actually get across the river by fording it. You had to just walk through the water.
Yeah.
And so he didn't want that, so he wrote a petition, and that's why we could actually do the research on Pierpoint, because there's a few lines in that petition where it says where he was from, which is a country called Bundu in Africa, it said when he was captured, 1760, and he said how old he was. He was about 16 when he was captured. And so, and the government, he never got an affirmative answer to the petition.
And what was the petition for?
It was to be sent back to England, and then from England to the mouth of the Gambia or Senegal rivers, and from there he would find his way back home. Which, when you think of it, is incredible, right?
Yeah.
This guy's almost 80.
Yeah.
But he would go by ship to England
He
and
spent
Africa.
4 times as much time out of
That's
Africa,
right.
but wanted to return.
But he would find his way back.
Yeah.
If you drop him
Yeah.
off at the end of the river, he'll find
I'll know
his
my
way
way
back up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's incredible. So,
So that petition was rejected.
yeah, we don't know what the actual official answer was,
Yeah.
but we know he ended up here because he had got what they called his land was settled. He had cleared 5 acres, which they needed to do.
And he had five years to accomplish that?
Yeah, they had about
Before
5 years to do it, and I think his was done by 1824, around that time period.
Yeah, and he wasn't able to get help to do that either,
No,
was
he must have had help.
Yeah.
Because by that time he was very old.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, yeah, because I mean, he was living as part of a community. That's what people don't understand, is that the black community in Ontario had been here since the American Revolution, if not before. And he would have been like, and what the impression, when I was doing the research, people up in the Owen Sound, Grey County, Simcoe County area had stories of him, oral history.
Yeah.
And the impression you got from them, he was like a griot, or the storyteller, the history keeper. So that, which was a revered position. So he did have a standing. So people helped take care of him
Yeah.
in his old age. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, where did Pierpoint die?
Well, that we don't know.
No.
See, people in St. Catharines think he might have died there
Because he had land in St.
yeah,
Catharines
he
at one
had
point.
property in St. Catharines, and in his will, he'd actually had a lot, but it was never proven that he actually owned that lot. And plus, his will was written in Niagara. So my impression is that he probably would move back and forth. You know, no way you would stay up in Garifrax in the winter. If you read the original accounts from the Scottish settlers,
Yeah.
and we have one, and we think it might these two young Scots guys might have been staying in his cabin along the Grand River, close to where you live,
Yeah.
right? And they describe it that they'd have to keep the door covered, which wasn't really a door. I think it was more just a cloth covering
have a
or a
blanket
leather
or-
covering,
Yeah.
because the wolves are outside the cabin in the winter. But then the cabin would fill with smoke because there was no chimney. And so it was pretty miserable in the winter.
Yeah.
So I think he was back in Niagara area. So we don't know where he died, but I don't think it was St. Catharines, because St. Catharines was pretty well established by 1837 when his will was probated. So we figured he died around that time. And if he had died in St. Catharines, there should have been a notation somewhere
Yeah.
in the news.
Because at that point, record keeping was as good as anywhere in the British Empire.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, St. Catharines is well established.
Yeah.
And the other reason I think that, because about 20 years after his death, there actually is a story about Pierpoint where people are digging up his land looking for a treasure
Ah, okay.
because they thought he was rich. So,
Yeah.
so they had a story in St. Catharines that he had a treasure on his land. So if they had a story 20 years after his death, they would have known in St. Catharines where he was buried.
Yeah. And probably dug it up.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. They would have first looked for his body because probably would have been buried with
Yeah.
him or close to him. So.
Now tell me about Broken Shackles, because I've not heard of this book.
Okay.
So
Yeah, Broken Shackles was a book that was first published in 1889. And when I was doing research on Pierpoint, people up in the Grey County area, again, the old black settlement up there, kept
would that be
mentioning-
up near Chatsworth area?
yeah, Chatsworth and Flesherton,
Yeah.
Priceville.
Yep.
all up
Those
in
are
the-
my old stomping
Oh
grounds.
yeah, all up in that area. Yeah, Chatsworth is
Yeah.
quite a bit there, and so they mentioned this book, Broken Shackles. So I figured on a whim, I tell you, I'll ask the Orangeville Library to see if they could do an interlibrary loan, and a week or two later, an original copy from 1889 came from the Chatham
Wow.
Library, which really surprises me that they would just send it
Yeah.
through interlibrary loan. And I read it and I thought, wow, this is a really interesting story, still relevant today, and it could be great republished. But the problem with the book, whenever they had a black person speaking, it was written in this really broken English, almost impossible to read. When they had an Irish guy speaking, it was this broken Irish brogue type thing.
Okay.
So I had to fix that up. So that's why I edited the edition and cleaned up the language.
So you've gone from a phonetic sort of
so
interpretation
to what they really would have been saying.
Yeah.
Not this broken English type thing. And which didn't make sense. For one thing, they say that Henson, who the story is about, spoke English very well. He was a slave from Maryland who managed to escape and come here and end up in Owen Sound.
And so he would have come up before the Civil War, and
Yeah, see, he had escaped from slavery in Maryland, was in Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and he married a woman from New Jersey who was probably free because she actually owned a house and property. But his owner saw him, or someone who knew his owner saw him in Philadelphia, and the Fugitive Slave Act had been passed, which means anyone could pick you up.
and take you back.
Yeah, so they loaded up a wagon with the 3 daughters and went up to Lewiston, New York, where she had family, and then came into Canada.
Came across at Queenston. And
went into Canada. And what happened, though, is tragically, one of his daughters died in Toronto. And then him and his wife split up. So it doesn't tell that, it doesn't describe that in the story, but that must have been a pretty traumatic scene.
Well, sure.
Where he's seeing his wife and 2 daughters leaving, and he's here by himself in Canada.
Yeah. And after displacing everybody, to build a better life,
That's
and then
right.
having it, fall through your fingers.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, I am so glad that we've put this sort of history together, because when I first moved here, and it was as recently as '99, there was very little information.
That's right.
About Pierpoint and about the black settlers that were a stone's throw just upriver from a Scottish settlement.
That's right.
And to think about how far things have come since then. Since that time, we've had a Heritage Minute with Richard
That's
Pierpoint.
right,
And just recently, in the last couple of years, a tract of land was donated by people who live on the river. Part of the original Pierpoint deed
right.
has been turned into a fly fishing preserve.
Yeah, it was very nice.
which is wonderful. And there's a bit of interpretive signage down by the little parking area that's been built there. So that's wonderful steps taken to recognize early pioneers in our community. And I want to thank you very much for your work in making sure, because I'm sure that if you and your brother hadn't grabbed onto this story that was so close and so personal, that it probably wouldn't have the prominence that it has now. So appreciate it very much.
No
and thank
problem.
you so much for coming to talk to us
Oh,
on
great.
Turning
It's
Pages
been great.
today.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
We'll be right back in a few minutes with more Turning Pages.